Now let's welcome our first speaker, Dr. Xin.
Oh, thank you so much. A very good morning to you all. It is such a pleasure and a tremendous privilege to be speaking with you as part of this incredible event. Huge thanks to Violet Tang for reaching out to me. I'm speaking to you from Jojage, also known as Montreal, located on the unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka from Kahnawake and Kanesatake, who continue to care for its well-being and who nurture meaningful connections between all who share it. Talking about Asian diasporic identity and experience has, I think, really become
对于
my
我来
life.
说，一个是非常，还有我的艺术，还有我的展销。对于我们这种近现代的艺术家，对于我来说，我非常对于我现在是少数主义，但其实我是可以非常开心来做来做表示。
artists we show, considering who has been underrepresented or historically misrepresented. And I draw on this knowledge every day. So I wanted to share some images with you. Here we go. Oh, let me get it back. All right. So I am a proud woman of Asian descendants. My father was born in Swatow, China, and at the fall of the Republic era, he and his family fled to Borneo and then ended up in Hong Kong, where he spent his teenage years. My mother was born in Kabangkalan, located in the western Visayas of the Philippine archipelago, but due to economic constraints, she was sent to live with her aunt in the northern town of Lawag at the age of 8. No strangers to forced migration, they both left their countries of origin in the 1960s for a life of greater economic stability in the United States. They met at the University of Houston, Texas, and when my mother secured a job in Hamilton, Ontario, she left the US and my father followed soon after. They married in 1967 and eventually became Canadian citizens in conjunction with the relaxation of immigration laws. I was
在这里边成长。我来自 Hamilton， 1971年出生，然后有各种多文化的成长中。然后我一直在说，我在我的人生中一直在分享这个故事。这个是我的小学生的时候，在我幼儿园的时候，我们是幼儿园的时候一直在去庆祝各种多文化的交流。然后我们可以感受到，作为加拿大人，我们还是有各种各样的文化的交融。我会来上公立学校，然后我们的老师说可以我们去分类，对于我们不同组织，希望我们的老师希望我们可以去创造各种多文化的环境。然后我们可以看到，这个是我做的这只龙非常大，同时也会加了一个，我还给它的龙的眼睛去加了一个特别大的一个贴画。然后其实我会特别愿意去做这种去粘贴的，然后我还特别喜欢画画。然后大家可以看到，然后我可以跟一群小朋友们和亚洲人一起来做这些活动。然后我的老师又说做这些东西，然后老师说那你呢？然后老师决定了，他去给我一个橘黄色的，然后呢我会用黑色的马克笔来画。然后我站了起来，然后我觉得非常的尴尬，然后我觉得用这个胶棒我不知道如何去做。然后对于我来说，因为我是一个黑眼睛的学生嘛，然后我当初能感受到，哦，原来我跟其他人的颜色种族不太一样。然后我同时会觉得我的外表还有我的身体的一些不同，然后那个时候我会意识到我自己和别人不一样，然后我如何去跟世界去交互。然后我希望我可以有这种蓝眼睛和黄色的头发，因为我希望跟他们一样。 当我可以去说的时候，当走路的时候，我更想变得更加加拿大人。当我从中学的时候，我又更加意识到我跟别人不同，然后我不喜欢去吃供中国食物。13岁的时候，我第二代的时候，其实我们都会有有一段时间可能没有那么认识于自己的一些亚裔的传统，然后同时对于我来说非常的困难去讨论这些东西跟我的家庭，因为我觉得我非常害怕去别人让。
So for the most part, I stayed silent. And my story is not unusual. As I'll discuss in a moment, my PhD research revealed that this is the experience of most, let's say 95% of people of Asian heritage growing up in North America in the 70s and 80s. The upside is that for the same 95%, the rejection of cultural heritage changed as we got older. For me, this desire to acknowledge and redefine myself through my Asian heritage came through identification with strong Asian women, artists, journalists, scientists, designers, and those in my family, in particular, my Chinese grandmother, Charlotte. She was a well-respected entrepreneur, an influential member of her community, and led many initiatives to improve women's lives. She also had a remarkable sense of style and wore cheongsam or qipao every day. She and women like her spoke to me and awakened my desire to fully affirm myself and my own power as a woman of Asian heritage. The other significant thing that happened was that I discovered the term, concept, condition, and experience called diaspora. Growing up of mixed Asian heritage, not having learned either of my parents' languages, I have struggled with not being recognized as really Chinese or Filipino in these communities. And of course, as a person of color, I am not readily claimed by dominant white society either. So where do I fit? The answer was in the diaspora. The word diaspora is taken from the Greek diasporin, which means to disperse. More precisely, it comes from the word dia, which means across, and spirin, which means scatter. Diasporic people have been defined as those forcibly displaced from their countries of origin and include exiles, refugees, asylum seekers, and survivors of enslavement. But diasporans also uproot themselves in pursuit of education, land, and business and career opportunities. From the 1960s onwards, the idea of diaspora became mostly associated with the first generation of people to settle in the new country and who developed the ability to skillfully negotiate its cultural terrains, but stay emotionally connected to the homeland, forming communities with others who share the same ethno-diasporic heritage. As many scholars claim, the earliest discussions of diaspora were grounded in a concept of a homeland and a desire to return to that homeland. But a great scholar named James Clifford opened up that theory so that it need not be limited to just this idea of a longing for a homeland and a longing to return. After all, for someone like me, the idea
其实对于我来说，这种家乡祖国非常的复杂，因为其实我们希望人和人去交流，然后非常的复杂，但其实我们这种文化认同感，然后关于这个词来说，我能感受到这种压力感，因为我们有些觉得有些人很多这种移民来到了加拿大的人，我们有什么样的这种文化的交流，我们的经历，我们一直这种进步，其实我们可以感受到我们这种归属感，第二代移民的第二代，还有我们之后的孩子们，这个就是我们的认同感，对于我们来说非常的，我还用在了我的文化中，我非常愿意去专注于这方面的探索，我觉得非常的愿意去跟大家分享我的观察。
and celebration of being a diasporic person of Asian heritage. Most of my artwork is in video, and the first work I made in 1995 is called A Few Colorful Phrases. And it was a very personal experimental documentary that explored everything I wanted to say about growing up as a Canadian-born woman of Asian heritage through 3 questions that I encountered a lot. If you don't mind me asking, where are you from? You know what they say about Oriental girls? And has anyone ever called you a banana? What you're seeing here is the VHS cover of this videotape. That's what we were working with back in those days. So the first phrase, if you don't mind me asking, where are you from, refers to the experience of having to explain yourself, sometimes multiple times a day. And if you're like me and you're born in Canada and someone asks you this, it reaffirms the perception that if you're a person of color, you cannot possibly be from here. I think a lot of work has been done in society to address this blind spot, but still more work can be done to change up this perception so that it becomes less the norm to assume a person of color is not from here, and to realize that this type of question reinscribes the notion of difference between the dominant culture and the immigrant other. The second phrase, you know what they say about Oriental girls, refers to the exoticized representation of Asian women in popular culture, as well as negative stereotypes such as the geisha, the dragon lady, or the tragic prostitute. And I wanted to talk about how these stereotypes are constructed and proliferated as part of an industry, but more how these perceptions have serious consequences for how men see women of Asian heritage and how we see ourselves. And then the third phrase, has anyone ever called you a banana, starts to get more into the idea of connecting to your people through the diaspora experience. So when you discover that other people like you have had the same experience, you realize that you're not alone and that others understand what you've been through. And this becomes a source of great empowerment. Ultimately, with this work, I wanted to inspire the viewer to contemplate their own relationship to ethnicity and to celebrate difference. In 2010, I created another video work, and the question I wanted to explore was whether the wearing of the cheongsam or qipao, the Chinese dress, could help me reconnect more meaningfully with my Chinese heritage. In order to explore that question, I interviewed 5 Montreal-born women of Chinese heritage and edited together selected excerpts from those interviews that I hope would really open up the variety of thoughts, ideas, attitudes, and wearing practices of the Chinese dress by Montreal-born women of Chinese heritage. And I combined the audio montage with images from family photos, clips from the film In the Mood for Love, archival images of cheongsam tailors and women in cheongsam, and filmed images from a Montreal-based cheongsam tailor's studio and boutique, as well as images of myself getting fitted for and wearing a tailor-made cheongsam. The final work was called Ode to the Cheongsam. After completing that video, I realized that I had not fully exercised all I wanted to explore in regards to the Chinese dress and its relationship with Chinese identity and heritage. So in order to go yet further with this question, I developed a larger research-based artwork as part of my PhD, which became an installation combining multi-channel video, the creation of objects, and audio montage, all which were presented in a mall in Chinatown rather than a typical gallery setting. I was interested in further exploring not only the formal and historical aspects of the cheongsam, but the desire to use it as a lens through which to study identity, ethnicity, and the diasporic condition of women of Chinese heritage in Canada. While Ode to the Cheongsam was dedicated to the garment's history and its symbolic representation, I felt there was still so much more to explore and say. The creative interpretation of this dress in the form of an exhibition of artworks also allowed me to bring my passion for clothing and style together with deeply personal questions about identity, belonging, and agency. And the final installation project presented in 2014 was called The Fitting Room. As I alluded to earlier, part of this research consisted of interviewing 20 Canadian-born women of Chinese heritage. I wanted to know if they had ever worn the cheongsam or qipao, why or why not, and to expand on understanding the attitudes and perceptions of this very iconic garment. The collection of attitudes and ideas and wearing practices generously offered by the women I interviewed provided a rich basin of material for which to develop the fitting room. I was interested in presenting the history as a way that might reflect the dress's enigmatic origins, not only through content, but also through structure. I was struck by the diversity and divergent experiences and opinions about the cheongsam and how the range of views might be correlated with a woman's sense of connection with her ethnic heritage. The massive influence of media images and popular culture on shaping these views was also important to present, and I wished to incorporate the multiplicity of voices with aspects of my personal experience into the creation of 3 cheongsam. As another goal for this installation, I wanted to underscore how the trying on of cheongsam is a gesture of feeling out aspects of one's identity that have not been fully explored. In the interest of an intercultural dialogue, I thought it important to demonstrate how the choosing and wearing of clothing to represent oneself in everyday life is an action that transcends ethnicity, gender, and generation. And my hope was therefore to make this exhibition an inclusive experience, despite the focus on a culturally specific subject. I asked each woman to attempt to describe her connection with her Chinese heritage. Did they practice any Chinese customs or traditions? Was Chinese spoken at home? Would she consider her family part of the Chinese community? And then with this foundation established, I then focused on a set of questions about the cheongsam. The first question was if she had ever worn a cheongsam. If she had not, I asked what factors contributed to not having worn it. And then I asked if there might be any circumstances under which she might wear the cheongsam. If she had worn it, I asked about the first time, the occasion, how old she was, what the dress looked like, how and where she acquired it, and how she styled it. I then followed up with an inquiry into how she felt wearing it, both physically and in terms of her emotional and mental state. What reactions did she receive and how did it make her feel? Has she worn the dress since? And if so, I asked her to describe these subsequent wearings, the occasion and how she felt, how she was received. Whether the woman was being interviewed and had worn the dress or not, I wanted to know about her impression of the cheongsam and what it might mean or symbolize for her. And I also wanted her to explain whether the dress could be worn by anyone regardless of ethnic heritage, or if it should be reserved for women of Chinese heritage only. So what I thought to do next was to share a few excerpts from these interviews to share with you the range of responses and what they can tell us about the experiences of Chinese women in the Canadian diaspora. Now, these are all women who were born between 1969 and 1986. So now I'm speaking in these other women's voices. I think for me personally, I think it's the expectation of looking Chinese and wearing this dress. People might come up to me and speak Chinese and I would feel foolish. And since I don't feel 100% Chinese, I don't feel comfortable wearing the dress. I feel totally ignorant through non-exposure, not educating myself. I can't speak to it. I remember a white girl wore the cheongsam top and I asked my mom why it looked different. And my mom said, oh, they look better on white people. So I wore the cheongsam top with baby barrettes, cat-eye glasses, jeans, and combat boots. That was my interpretation. They're shiny and overly bright and have hideous patterns that are often not well cut, so the seams don't quite match up and the pattern is disjointed. Oh, they're not so attractive. But the idea of participating fully in my family and fully in my family's activities is what is appealing about it. and what keeps bringing me back to these cheongsam stores, despite the garishness of it all. I try them on and they wrinkle in certain places and they have extra material in others, and the sales lady will reassure me that they can take it in and make it all fine, but it's not comfortable to be in, and I feel self-conscious about my body and the excesses of my body, particularly my chest, which is not supposed to be there in the cheongsam, also my hips, which are not intended to be there, and how the dress wrinkles whenever I sit down. It's just not a look I can pull off. I would love to wear the cheongsam to school and really own that history, because I wasn't only putting on those clothes. I wasn't only putting on those particular patterns that signify belonging to certain racial and ethnic groups. I was putting on my grandmother. I was wearing my family history. It's a way of expressing and being in contact with one's heritage. It's the symbolism that is anchored in tradition, a sign of respect and community also. Not only a garment, but the fact that you wear it for other people. It's a good way to connect. For me, there could be no other dress. I don't know if it was to identify myself as Chinese as much as it was because of the occasion. And from an early age in my head, when you have a major event, you get to wear the beautiful Chinese dress. And it was my turn. I find the dress folklorizes me. That's not something I look for. I have always had difficulty with the Mexican that wears the poncho, even if I recognize the pride that goes along with that. It brings about comments. The identity question is so present in my life, and I have so much to justify in regards to my politics, which is why I'm not very attached to the cheongsam. I found for the wedding that wearing the dress definitely brought me closer to my heritage and my family's expectations, and I was happy to do it. I like how it looks and how it feels, connecting with culture and with my family. They identify as Chinese, not really as Canadians. So for me, it was to please them and also to embrace that side of me that I never really embraced before. If not, my mother would have been upset and I didn't want to rebel anymore. I wanted to embrace my culture and be closer to my family. I wore a cheongsam only a handful of times and only for weddings and occasions where I would allow myself to wear a cheongsam. Since my mother came to Canada, when she was 13, she had an idealized idea of what the cheongsam was all about, and for her, she took great pride in wearing the cheongsam. For me, it was a completely different thing. As I got older, I got more comfortable, but as a young child, I was like, why do you want to underline that Chineseness of yourself? For my mother, it was very different because she was born in China. For her, wearing the cheongsam was part of a nostalgic fantasy because she was not fully raised in China and she didn't stay there. So in retrospect now, it gave her the opportunity to live out the fantasy of being Chinese. Outside of China, the cheongsam can be sort of antiquated through media and cinema. You present this docile, beautiful woman who is going to serve whoever's in charge, who is usually male. And the darker side is that you are typically sexualized and licentious and available. Asians look alike, quote unquote. So if you're wearing the cheongsam, you are automatically a geisha? Totally Asian, total Asian confusion. It's the hypersexualization of the Asian female that is signaled by the accoutrements. Men would drop stupid comments whether I wore a cheongsam or not. It was about being an Asian woman, period. But I get that less and less today. It's really a different world we live in, and the world powers are very different. So that was before China was a superpower. You have to wear it in appropriate circumstances and in the right context. It's not for schlepping about. You have to respect the garment. You don't wear it with flip-flops. You don't wear it with flats. You really have to wear it with heels. You have to carry yourself in a different way. You can't be doing regular activities you would normally do because it's not forgiving in that way. You have to do your hair, your makeup, everything has to be on point, or else it just takes away from it or belittles it. That's the disrespect. Okay, back in my own voice again. What I learned through hearing these women's stories is that there's a lot of ambivalence that surrounds the dress. Some women love it and some women sort of fear it. And these attitudes are often a reflection of the individual's relationship with their ethnic identity. I also learned that there are very heated arguments about who can and can't wear this dress, how it must look, and how it must be worn. The exciting thing I discovered, especially because I am a big fan of the cheongsam, is that it is being worn more and more as a tool of agency for women to assert and celebrate their ethnic heritage. In my explorations with cheongsam wearing, I have attempted to subvert the concern of self-orientalization by wearing the cheongsam in everyday life as my grandmother did, in an attempt to render it familiar rather than reserving it for culturally specific occasions. As mentioned earlier, I mix them with Western identified pieces of clothing, much like they were worn in the 1930s. And what these experiments have shown me is that the wearing of a dress that has come to symbolize the exotic can, in this current globalized context, create agency. And my ability to wear the dress as a way to express a cosmopolitan fluency is a direct result of my experience as a Canadian-born woman of Chinese heritage. As Canadian-born women of Chinese heritage continue to discover and claim this dress for themselves, they are finding ways to access a heritage that exists beyond a singular essentialized concept of Chineseness. The women who spoke to me have a relationship with the cheongsam that is informed by the varied experiences as children of immigrants finding ways to survive and thrive in the Canadian context. While this dress can be desirable for its formal qualities, its link with tradition and family make it a way to show pride in one's Chinese heritage. At the same time, the cheongsam can produce anxiety in a situation when its display on the body may further underscore otherness and concerns about the reinforcement of stereotypes that cater to the male gaze. It's a dress that affects a performative posture that can reproduce colonized fantasies of Chinese femininity while simultaneously presenting the potential for an empowered image of the diasporic Chinese female. So I thought it would be kind to give you a sense of the art in the fitting room exhibition. It consisted of 3 interrelated works. And the first work that the viewer encountered upon entering the exhibition area was called Chinese Screen, which consisted of 4 projections onto a multi-paneled screen. And for the first projection, I wanted to address the history of the cheongsam. So I used archival images of the Chinese dress, personal photos, documentation photos of cheongsam tailors in Hong Kong, and calendar illustrations from the 1920s to illustrate the early history of the dress, also to suggest its origins and to show how it was presented. These images are part of the dress's past, which is also analogous to China's history. I brought these older images into conversation with contemporary references, specifically excerpts again from the film In the Mood for Love, to reflect the significance of this film for Canadian-born women of Chinese heritage and Chinese women. I also incorporated clips of myself. I reappropriated those actually from the Ode to the Cheongsam video, and I added new video footage of myself clothed in the 3 dresses that I had made for this exhibition. And my aim was to bring the past and the present together, where Chinese origins echo through my presence in Canada. So the second work in the show is called Hybrid Dresses, and it consisted of 3 dresses and an audio piece. It entailed an in-depth investigation of personal and cultural symbols and images, the symbolic use of color in Chinese history and cosmology, the history of embroidery and its significance to China, and an exploration of discourses that influenced the design, fabric choice, and cut of the garments. And there was also an audio piece, which consisted of an audio montage of excerpts from the original interviews. The red dress is called Sim Dynasty dress, and it consisted of a store-bought dress made from red silk satin brocade, and it was heavily adorned with large flowers, bats, longevity and happiness symbols, and scrolls in purple, blue, green. And most strikingly, heavy gauge metallic gold thread. The very busy motif encouraged me to think about the pervasiveness of Chinese symbols that I had encountered throughout my life. And I thought about my desire to be acknowledged by the Chinese community and to situate myself within the culture. And it occurred to me that I might hand embroider the character of my surname in gold thread onto the dress in any available space within this very busy pattern. And I ended up embroidering 18 characters into the dress. I don't know, maybe if you see my cursor, there's 1, there's 2, there's 3. I also wanted to acknowledge my Canadian cultural upbringing, so I complemented the characters on the front of the dress with an embroidered outline of my given name across the back of the dress, like in reference to how growing up in the 70s and 80s, we would wear these t-shirts with our names ironed on in the back. The desire to wear one's name on a t-shirt was incredibly empowering for kids and teenagers. And so I ordered iron-on letters in the desired size and font, and then I embroidered those on the back. This one's called DNA dress, and I work principally with the idea of how I'm not recognized as a person of Chinese heritage despite my DNA. I wanted to work with a visualization of my DNA as a decorative motif for the dress, which would underscore how the unreadability of the pattern, despite being displayed on the dress's outer surface, would be analogous to my experience as a person whose ethnicity is difficult and at times impossible to ascertain on a purely visual register. And through my concept of primary colors, I determined that this dress would be blue, in particular a darker royal blue, which is the shade that makes direct reference to the male Chang Pao, appropriated by female students in the early 1920s. I wanted to combine this aspect of the Cheongsong's history with the DNA concept as a way to link my feminist reading of the dress with my search for recognition within the Chinese community. And embroidery was the perfect technique to incorporate the DNA pattern, not only for its historic and cultural significance, but also for how the stitches physically mesh with the fabric in an additive to make it stronger. So that gives you a sense of my DNA. That's actually my DNA visualized. And then I translated it into a pattern using the embroidery machine to embroider the pattern into the fabric. So in this way, embroidery interlocks with the fabric the way my DNA is integral to my physical and biological makeup. And then to add to the reality of the illegibility of my ethnicities, I decided to embroider the DNA pattern in a thread color that's exactly the same as the fabric of the dress. And then, given the opportunities to explore visibility and invisibility in the dress, it made sense to play with the lining, which is a practical element of the Qi Pao, as well as a more subtle aesthetic field in which to intervene. And normally the lining of the garment is hidden from view, but because of the side slits, it is possible to catch quick glimpses of the lining when the wearer moves. So as my DNA is therefore the proof of my Chinese heritage, it passes imperceptibly on the outside. I decided to bring some actual proof of my heritage to the inside of the dress. And I scanned passport photos of my Chinese grandparents, George and Charlotte, that were taken in the 1950s. And then I cropped their images into circles in order to create a fabric motif that referenced the round medallions that we would find, say, on an emperor's robe. And then the last dress is called banana dress. And I wanted to go back to this idea of the banana syndrome, and which makes reference to the video, my first video, and has anyone ever called you a banana? And as we know, banana is often a pejorative term used amongst Canadian-born or raised people of Chinese heritage, and to describe the ambivalence of having lost one's ethnicity due to attempts at assimilation into the dominant culture. But rather than express the guilt and shame for not being Chinese enough, which is a feature of the banana syndrome, I chose to make this dress in the spirit of reclaiming and celebrating my banana-ness. I wanted to acknowledge my hybridity, and I chose to have this cheongsam made from cotton fabric with a polka dot pattern, which reminded me of the dresses I would wear for Sunday school picnics when I was a kid growing up in Ontario. And it represented freshness and youth. Yellow is not only the most obvious choice for the color of this dress, it completes the primary color concept and is also the color most revered and worshipped in Chinese culture between the establishment of the Han Dynasty in 206 BCE until the end of the Qing Dynasty in 1911, unreserved only for the emperor. What better color to use for a dress that aims to affirm and assert one's Chinese heritage in spite of the marginalizing barriers that are up on either side of the Chinese-Canadian hyphen. Furthermore, I use the color yellow to subvert and disrupt the campaign-like catchphrases such as yellow peril and yellow fever that were meant to denigrate Chinese Canadians. The concept for this dress also brought about an irresistible opportunity to use the lining. In the interviews, many women shared their fear of being exposed as imposters in the Chinese community. Their shame in being labeled banana is therefore something that is deeply embedded. So with this in mind, I found a graphic image on the internet of a banana shedding its peel. The end result is a field of bananas that resemble like birds flying up defiantly in a bid for freedom. And I printed my customized pattern onto silk, and as a finishing touch, hand embroidered the outline of a few of the bananas in gold thread as a way to symbolize how Canadian-born people of Chinese heritage are transcending this syndrome and transforming this experience.
但是其实我们一直在改变。我知道我没有，我不是纯中国人、加拿大人或者，但其实我都是在一起的。我也愿意去庆祝我的这种复杂性。我可以跟大家来分享。
You to illustrate how the expression of Asian diasporic experience through art has been a healing and affirming experience for me. In regards to my primary research, almost every single woman I interviewed shared a very similar experience to my own. Experiences with racialization, discrimination, microaggression, and hostility towards their ethnicity, which caused them to reject their Asian cultural heritage, to stop speaking Chinese, to not want to eat Chinese food, to not wanting to be seen or perceived as ethnic. And all of this took a major toll on their self-esteem. And it was also very hard for their families, who were ill-equipped to deal with these experiences. But what we are seeing now is that we've evolved and we have so much more awareness and knowledge so that, especially for the younger folks, we can help each other by being open about our experiences with racism and hostility. We do not have to be afraid or silent or deny when these things happen. Instead, we can listen to each other and validate these feelings, fears, and anxieties. As diasporic people, we have mastered the art of being comfortable with being uncomfortable, which we have taken and challenged into amazing resilience. This resilience is evidenced in the Asian excellence that thrives today and will be even stronger tomorrow, despite the head tax, the Exclusion Act, Yellow Peril, and all of the modern day descendants of these oppressive tools that manifest themselves in glass ceilings, the persistence of negative stereotypes, everyday microaggressions, and hate crimes. Despite those historically rooted realities, as diasporic Asian people, we can remember to empower ourselves each and every day when we tap into and channel our deep knowledge that transcends place. Our identities cannot be reduced or essentialized. Our ability to negotiate more than one culture is a complex art form, and over time we master it. We have superpowers. We can employ all of our senses in more than one culture at a time, and as a result, we are able to appreciate and enjoy so much more. Our knowledge and experience as diasporic people has developed in each of us a finely tuned ability to negotiate complex social, cultural, and political situations. In that way, we are all ambassadors and formidable diplomats. We are also time travelers with the ability to be in the past, present, and future simultaneously and constantly. We are generous of spirit and have an innate sense of the importance of connection to others. Right now, we are at a unique place in time to embolden ourselves to be and express fully our Asian diasporic identities. We are enriched through the gathering of strength in ourselves and each other through kinship and with great empathy. This is the time to celebrate our rich heritages and our multiplicity as diasporic people. This is the time to evolve and instill in our future diasporic people of Asian heritage a great loving pride. And to do this, we must start with ourselves. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sim, for the very informative and inspiring presentation. And the project of the fitting room is very endearing to my heart. And I especially appreciate how it is like so closely works with and engages with the Chinese Canadian community, as well as like incorporating your own like family histories and your heritage into the project, like super rich and meaningful. So like, it's also really interesting and surprising to see and also to hear from your speech that a lot of people with Asian heritage went through the denial phase in their growth, and at one point were like super uncomfortable with their ethnicity. So I believe it is so important for you to bring such inspiring projects and also like the speech to engage with this community and like to kind of like making people realize that different phases of growth and maybe eventually people can like work within themselves and with one another to like learn how to like negotiate and explore their personal identities. Maybe being comfortable with it won't like come in just like one moment. It would probably be gradual, and it can be like a lifelong course for everyone. So like I really encourage if everyone in this conference, if you're interested in learning about how art and fashion sometimes visualize and reflect our cultural identities, you could check out Dr. Sim's book, Wearing the Chinsam, Dress and Culture in a Chinese Diaspora, as well as the other projects and exhibitions that she has mentioned. 那我们非常感谢Dr. Cheryl Sim 为我们带来非常精彩和真挚的演讲。如果你也和很多的亚裔或者是作为西方少数文化的族群一样，有着对自我认知的困惑、迷茫甚至是否定的话，那么我们认为你们可以去看Dr. Sim 的一本书，叫做《The Fitting Room》，然后去探索服装和形象有的时候怎么可以帮助人们去很好的表达自己，去传达文化，去传达抒发自己的内心那么也希望大家可以通过学习、阅读、交流，正视对心中对于原生文化困惑，甚至是比较矛盾的部分，来接受更加接纳、更加真实的自己。So now we have the 15 minutes of Q&A. So I have a lot of questions myself, but I will keep them for myself for now and open the floor to everyone else. So if you have any questions for Dr. Sim, please use the chat box on Zoom and send your questions to everyone so that we can all see and we can present the questions.
There's a really interesting question from Jimmy Lee.
Yeah, wow. So I guess I will read out the question. Thank you very much, Dr. Sim, for sharing your experience and thoughts. Due to diaspora's Euro meaning, people who have left their home country, usually involuntarily, to foreign countries around the world, I personally feel that there needs to be a more effective and empowering term for promoting inclusiveness and the sense of belonging. our people with Chinese heritage, have been an integral part of countries like Canada, America, and Australia for many generations. We call the country where we live home. In the meantime, are immensely proud of our ethnic background and cultural heritage. In Australia, we very often this term multicultural communities. So what is your viewpoint about choosing a more effective and empowering term to describe our community?
It's an excellent question, Jimmy. Thank you very much. For a long time, I felt diaspora was limited because of, its early scholarly rootings in the idea of homeland and the longing to return to a homeland. That was early in the 1960s. That was sort of the prevailing idea. Around 30 years later, scholars like James Clifford, Stuart Hall, cultural theorists, Avtar Bra as well, recognized that it was very limited and it didn't really give much to people of the second generation like myself. And so they argued that diaspora doesn't need to only refer to this idea of a longing for a homeland. It can also be rooted in a kind of consciousness of a shared experience. So they were basically advocating that diaspora and its meanings needed to open up. And it was at that point that I felt that, okay, yeah, if we can open up that meaning, and I can find myself in that, then that helps me a lot. That helps me to ground my sense of identity. And because, homeland, that doesn't really mean much to me either. So I really feel diaspora works for me because of the work of these scholars to, again, de-essentialize the term diaspora and to allow it to evolve, just like we allow our identities to evolve constantly. We can never just be put in a box and that's it, that's all you get to be. So these terms, again, need to live and breathe. There's also an interesting point that you raise about the use of multicultural and multicultural communities. I personally have been very critical of multicultural policies. I understand why they were established, and a lot of it has to do with sort of politics and sort of political, politically motivated needs. There was a time in my life when I thought that multiculturalism was really important. I think it is still important. I also think that there's a place to be critical around how, as a policy, it can re-articulate sort of the differences between the dominant culture and then those of us who are considered immigrant other. In Australia, though, I can see that may take on a different nuance, different history, similar but different, right? And so I can recognize and appreciate how multicultural communities may find empowerment and agency in that particular historical, political, and cultural context.
Thank you so much for the answer. Yes, thank you so much, Jimmy, for raising the question. It's like so super important to discuss diaspora as well as like multiculturalism. Is there any other questions? Yes, I see one from Sue. So I will read the question. Was there the sense of culture shame in the second generation Chinese Canadians, the shame that since they did not have full exposure to Chinese culture, it's like rolling, they do not feel like having the authenticity and agency attached to it?
100%, Sue. Exactly right. Yes, there's, first of all, when you're second generation, you're struggling to assert some sense of belonging, and you're kind of in between you know, sort of those two cultures. There's what you live in your home family life, which is also then again naturally going to be evolving, right?
去改变。
If both my parents say
对于我的父母来说，
from Hong Kong, for
他们来自
and
香港，
to Toronto,
然后又来到了多伦多，
you know, they would have that shared
他们会
culture, but
去
then
分享他们的文化，其实会改
they
变。
are in a different context.
他们在不同的背景下，其实他们也改变了，
Way of negotiating
去
culture is going to
分享，
be different, you know,
其实
in
不一样的，
Canadian context, and that's really enriching and wonderful.
非常棒。其实
For the children,
对于
it gets
孩子来说，觉得非常有意思和复杂。
what we're trying to
其实我愿意跟大家去改变，非常有意思，非常的有积极的改变。
those days in the 70s,
但其实在1970年、80年的时候， 非常难，
one of few
你经常是非常少数的人。
in my school,
在我的在我的学校中，像我这种亚裔和不同和黄皮肤
kind of an isolation,
这种孤独感，
but which, you know, as I explained, led
其实我来感受，
kind of reject, you know,
其实是一种
ways
被拒绝，
assimilate or attempt assimilation into mainstream society.
这种主流文化，
Have friends and be
因为我想有朋友和非常正常，
yes, it was
是的，
there were difficult
非常来说非常难，
difficult feelings about whether
这种
you
感受，
actually could claim
你到底
your
去
Chinese heritage.
展示我这种是有中国背景，
You didn't grow up in
你
China
没有在中国
or
出生，
in the Chinese Asian diaspora.
在这种中国文化中，
You're here in the West. It's a whole
你现在在一个西方，
removed sense of your
其实你把这些都
so yeah,
拿走
a
了，
little
对，
bit like neither here nor there.
你觉得不在这儿又不在那儿，
Something that I certainly struggled with.
这对于我来说也确实是一个挣扎，但现在来说，
Diasporic lens, it's like no, you can be this, that,
其
and
实
the other.
我现在可以变成这个、那个和那个，你不用去选。
Yeah, wow, it is like such inspiring lens to think that like one person can like have multiple beings and existing in multiple places. I wonder, does Sue have anything to say or? Should we move on to the next question? So the next
Sure.
one is from, I'm sorry if I pronounce it wrong, AHAC. The question is how we could empower this inclusion, diversity, and equity Oriental or Asian fashions on mainstream media and social media. Somebody used Vera Wang wedding.
There are some amazing women designers and men who have made it possible also for us, for me, and in particular, to be inspired and to be empowered. You know, I think of Anna Sui, you know, Simon Chang. I mean, there are just so many, you know, designers that emerged in the 80s and into the 90s that, you know, sort of despite their experiences, which were similar to mine, you know, were able to channel, you know, that power. So I would say that how can we empower this inclusion is we support each other. You know, we take inspiration from each other and we lift each other up. We shine a light on each other's work, talent. We basically uplift each other. I think that's the best way. And also to just be thinking about it all the time. You know, when you're thinking about hiring somebody, when you're thinking of, you know, any agency power that you have where you can lift other people of Asian diaspora up, take it.
Well, thank you so much for answering that question. And thank you so much for the question about like Asian empowerment, and also for mentioning fashion as a practice about like from like designers of Asian heritage. I'm thinking of like Vivian Tam and Anna Sui,
Yeah.
like yeah, artists like using maybe like Asian fabrics or like incorporating those like philosophies and motifs into their designs. That's
Absolutely,
super.
absolutely. No, it's super amazing. And then, you know, there's some, IHAC also mentioned contemporary artists, and there are a lot of exciting work happening, being made by Asian Canadian, Asian American, Asian Australian artists. You know, they're the pioneers like Yoko Ono and Yayoi Kusama, absolutely, and so many more currently. You know, Rick Leong, Ed Pien, Marigold Santos. I mean, on and on. We're here. We just have to keep on going.
Creators, content creators. Yes. Thank you so much for the presentation, for answering all the questions. I saw a very good question from Kelly, but we have like time constraints. So I think we need to move on, but I will like direct that question to you through email.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for having us today.
Thank you so much. This has been such an honor.